This podcast is a member of WGPRN, WildGamesProductions.com.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Darker Days podcast, episode number 11. I am your host, as usual, Vince, along with my co-host, Mark. Mark, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing outstanding. Vince, how are you?
I am just super and dandy on this nice warm day here in the state of Pennsylvania.
Dandy indeed. With us this evening, folks, we have a very, very special guest, none other than elite White Wolf freelancer Malcolm Shepard. Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Shucks. Well, hi there.
Good to have you aboard.
Thanks.
Okay, well, tonight we'll be having Malcolm on the show, and we have our questions answered. We thank all the listeners and all the people who signed up in the forums to flood us with the questions. Of course, some questions didn't make it, and, well, if you read the questions, you know why, but...
As you said, we got more questions for Malcolm than we've had for any other guest so far. So you'll be here till the small hours, Malcolm. So get comfortable.
Oh, shucks. Well, that's quite flattering. I just want to explain something first of all. Some of the questions that didn't get asked are questions that come on, guys. I can't answer because of non-disclosure agreements. So
yeah,
don't ask those questions.
Well, yeah, that seems to be something we get those every with every guest that we have, and it might be a good idea that we have a general disclaimer when we're putting the thread up for questions that if it's about a product that's upcoming, chances are that the guest isn't going to be able to answer questions on it. So, yeah, good point. Yeah,
the guy wants to keep his job, not spill the beans and lose his job. I mean, come on. It's a writer professional.
Sometimes you can get clearance for these things, but the stuff I got for Mirrors in the Chronicles Guide, I guess I just answered those questions, didn't I? Curse you!
Sneaky.
People who posted, you tricked me. All right, let's go. What's up?
Cool.
Mark, you want to reach down to that mailbag and tell us what we got this week?
Yes, indeed. There's been a little bit of time since our last show, so the mailbag has had time to fill up. Mm-hmm. First mail comes from Paige Turner, who sent us an awesome email with...
Mark, who's that?
Paige Turner, who sent us an awesome mail with a fantastic submission for the secret frequency. We've had lots of these recently, and we'll be working through everyone's submissions over the next few shows. This one came in at just the right time, though, and we'll be featuring that one in just a few minutes' time.
Mark, are you pulling my leg?
No, leave me alone. We had a mail also from Nathan Ortega. Hi, Nathan. Nathan would like to see a review on World of Darkness Innocence. Now, we've heard lots of good things about that book, so we'll be sure to add that to the review pile and get to it soon.
Also, if you come to our forums, I believe one of our forum users, Law, is running a game based on World of Darkness Innocence.
Well, that's right, that Secret Garden thing. I forget what it's called. Perilous Garden? Perilous Garden?
I believe it's Perilous Garden. Yeah, I don't have the forums up in the moment, cool. But if you want to just take a peek to see how it's run and want to know more about it, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer your questions.
We also had a mail from Dr. Ether, who sent in some incredible ideas for the secret frequency, which we will definitely be using. Great stuff there for Sherlock Holmes fans, and you'll see more about that in a couple of shows' time. Dr. Ether has also been sharing his Chronicle details for us on our forums, and he uses his base city, Manchester, in England, which is great, because so do I. We've had several really cool mails from Alakoff with a host of suggestions for various things, some of which he's posted on the forums, like his ideas about a Lost World-style plantation in the Deep South. And he's also interested in seeing a review of the Naga breed book for Werewolf the Apocalypse. And that'd be really cool. I really liked the Pharaoh back in the day, so we should get to that sometime. Brian Westcott sent in a mail looking for ideas on an upcoming adventure he's writing featuring the Three Fates, the Moriai. He posted a thread about this over on the White Wolf forums and the old World of Darkness section there, so check it out and send your ideas his way. Anatole sent in a mail right before the show, actually, and he thinks, Vince, that you and I seem to know what we're talking about, so that's another one fooled.
What? Huh? Okay.
Seriously, though, thanks for your support there, Anatole. Anatole wants to know if we're going to do more coverage of Vampire at any point. So, yes, 100% for sure. We've been exploring...
come on, who likes Vampire?
I have no idea of anybody who would want to play vampire. I mean, mage is the thing.
Yeah, I think he has only a very minor presence, really, in the in the development.
It's yesterday's game. Let's
know,
be honest.
They only have working on it.
Vampire is so 2000.
Marginal demand at best.
Go ahead, Mark.
We'll definitely get back to that. I've had this crazy idea about doing a feature on Dirty Secrets of the Black Cat for the Halloween show.
Mark.
But I'm not sure how sensible that is.
Mark, you just gave away the secret.
And as always, shouts out to our newest members at the forums: Ariadne, Lamented Whisper, Neverwhere, Evo Shandor, Snaltelt, JM Mariano, Rapscallion, Pronomancer, Welding Darkness, Daniel Say, and Osmendez. Hi guys, and welcome aboard.
Just super. Everyone's been joining up and asking questions, and Malcolm, you've been flooding our forums. Look at that.
Have I?
Not you personally,
cool.
but your name.
Not me personally.
By proxy, yeah.
No, and we have some, and of course we have a bunch of network shows on the network. We have Now Playing with Matt Buffington, mattbuffington.podbean.com, or is it M Buffington? I think it's on.
It's M Buffington.
Yeah,
it's M
sorry,
Buffington.
sorry, Matt. You check out his show there, and then we got Liquid Weird with the other Mark, and that's liquidweird.net. And
Indeed.
we also have our new show, our little Darkling, which you probably heard about and listened to. Mark, when's our next show?
Yeah, that's our 15-20 minute short podcast that features listener submitted segments, and we had a great segment just sent in by Matt Buffington on how you can incorporate the Triad from Werewolf the Apocalypse into your Werewolf the Forsaken games. And we'll be having another one of those out in a couple of weeks' time, featuring a segment by Beckett on the Book of Nod. So that's the Darkling podcast, our sister show with me and Vince again.
Again, yeah. And we will have a bucket full of Beckett's in that show, as usual.
Yes, we will.
And also, some people have. Didn't we get an email regarding some voicemail?
Yeah, Alakov sent us in a suggestion about asking whether listeners can submit their segments for the Darkling podcast just by voicemail.
Well, yeah, as long as it's not too long, I do have voicemail attached to my Skype, Alucard D20. You can just ring me up. It's always up, so you can just ring it up and leave a voicemail and, talk to me. Or you can follow me on Twitter, AlucardD20 at Twitter. And you can follow Mark, as usual, if he's not stalking Clive Barker.
That's getting so old.
Yeah, it's funny, though. You can also
it's funny
follow...
because it's true.
Malcolm, do you have... you're on Twitter as well, and people could follow you as well.
I am. I have the imaginative name of Malcolm Shepard. That's it. MALCOLMSHEPPARD. Yeah, hook up. Yeah, I think the last time I was on, I was 3 glasses of wine in, and I said a lot of things.
Good stuff.
So don't miss those less than wise posts from me.
Cool.
And also, it's a great way to keep up with the blog that I keep, since, of course, every time I post something on mobunited.com, it spits out there, too. So it's a handy way to keep up.
Cool.
Excellent. It's a good way to follow any of the developers of White Wolf, just to see what they're working on, read their stuff, Just look them up. I'm sure you'll find them. Sorry, Malcolm?
There's a great little community there, because there's Chuck and Eddie Webb and David Hill and a whole bunch of people, and they're pretty active. So there's always something going on. Those guys are so busy with their own projects. A day never goes by where I don't get a link to something interesting to read, a nice piece of fiction, or an interesting chunk of game design.
Excellent. Well, we're having David Hill on the next show, actually, so that's something to look forward to as well.
Surprise, surprise. That's our next show announcement will be David Hill. And that will wrap things up. Mark, what is our email?
Our email is darkerdaysradio@gmail.com.
Awesome pause. And you can check us out at darkerdays.tk. And let's get on to everybody's favorite segment.
It's under the stairs.
Oh, see? I want money.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once more to The Secret Frequency. And today we pay a visit to Poveglia Island. This little nugget was submitted to us by Paige Turner, who ran across it at the Dead Air blog. You may remember, regular listeners, the Dead Air blog was the cool blog we mentioned a few episodes ago. They also covered the Fontanelle Cemetery.
Right.
Now, Poveglia Island is located between Venice and the Lido in the Venetian lagoon in Italy. It's mostly farming land now, with a vineyard. Poveglia was settled almost 1,000 years ago, and it's existed in many forms over the years, as a monastery, an independent colony, a dumping ground for plague victims, a powder magazine for Napoleon, and a mental hospital for a somewhat sadistic doctor. During Roman times, it was used to isolate thousands of plague victims. It was more or less a jail for those ill with the plague, with leprosy, the Black Death. Folks were often taken there against their will, dragged from their homes, and ferried out to Poveglia, a terminal quarantine stopping point, if you will. It was used again in medieval times during the Black Death, and during the 13th and 14th centuries, the bodies began to pile up. So pits were dug, and the people were thrown in, alive or not. Even those showing the slightest symptoms of the Black Death were dragged, screaming from their homes.
I'm not dead yet.
I'm getting better. These living victims, including children and babies, were taken to the island, thrown into the pits of rotting corpses where they were left to die in agony. And once the pits were full, they'd set the contents on fire. Burned alive in a plague pit. Delightful. Venetians these days believe that when you walk on Poveglia Island, you are literally walking on these people's ashes. And they're probably not wrong. Poveglia was abandoned in 1380 and brought back into use again in 1922 when a mental institution was opened there. An apt choice if ever there was one.
Yeah, right.
Local law states that a particular mental health doctor tortured and killed many of the patients, and their spirits began to haunt the island, along with those of plague victims of the past. Eventually, this doctor began to see the spirits himself, and jumped, or was thrown, from the bell tower to his death. Rumor has it that he's now bricked up in that same tower, and some say you can still hear the bell ringing late at night. There's another legend that says he survived the fall, but was strangled by dark mists that rose up from the ground to engulf him. And just to add to the creepy factor, human remains still wash up on the island shore to this day, bones bleached white by sun and salt and surf. All in all, over 160,000 people are believed to have died there over the years. Ripe fodder indeed for your World of Darkness chronicle. So how are we going to use this in games?
Well, if I may,
Yeah.
one interesting thing about the island is that it's used for farming now, mostly vineyards. I mean, what's going into that wine?
The heady brew, yeah.
Yeah, the soil is being enriched by the long decomposed dead, and perhaps the more recently decomposed dead. Perhaps you can drink a ghost made
Very
from
cool.
those particular vintages.
Outstanding, yeah, I like that.
Interesting idea.
And, for other games, for games like Wraith or Geist or those involving ghosts, you have a place for the restless dead there to gather or draw the origins from, or, like Malcolm says, provide fuel for whatever is being drawn from the soil. And it also gains extra potency if you use it as a setting for a medieval game like Requiem for Rome or the Dark Ages Line. You can have characters taken there against their will, interred with the plague-ridden, and forced to make their escape or perish in fire. For mage games, the place could make an interesting node or hallow, especially of the corrupted variety, as well as a source of spirits for the less discerning summoner, or those who want to call up something really unpleasant. And for werewolf games, where spirits are more central to the setting, you can really develop the different types of spirits or unbrood that dwell there, or might be drawn there by its corrupted nature. Now, what I liked about this legend, the one of the Mad Doctor falling from the bell tower, was I found it especially interesting if you happen to be a player of Vampire the Masquerade. The La Sombre discipline of obtenebration features effects that mimic the story of the misty tendrils rising from the ground. That one stood out right away to me, so maybe there's an ancient La Sombra slumbering beneath the island. Why there? What's he doing there? Is he somehow responsible for the uses to which the island has been put over the years? And if so, why?
Vacation spot.
Yeah, it's the sun is nice. But anyway, 160,000 dead. 160,000. What if that number is only the beginning of something worse? If it's not a vampire sleeping there, but, say, an earthbound, the deaths may just be part of a centuries-long ritual to raise the ancient demon from sleep. And of course, for hunters, the island is a source of solid adventure ideas. Nearby tourist destinations could draw hunters to the area if they're threatened, and allow the characters to set foot on Poveglia and experience its delights firsthand. So anyway, finally, if any of our listeners have actually been to Venice, or even have photos of Poveglia, or have set foot there, do drop us a line and let us know, and maybe we'll chronicle your experiences on a future installation of The Secret Frequency.
Wow. Interesting information you brought us there, Mark. Where you find the stuff we still have yet to know.
You can thank Paige for that one.
Oh, that's right. Paige Turner.
Pretty awesome, and in fact,
Sorry, Malcolm?
Venice and the area around Venice is just fantastic for these kinds of things. Just because you have such a it sounds so cliche, a rich historical tapestry, but it's true, right? You have this series of islands that were essentially a refuge from the collapse of civilization. Right?
Yeah.
Places that were never really meant for this kind of built-up habitation, right? It's like a cultural sediment. And you have a city that, you
Okay, folks. Sorry about that technical difficulty that we had with Skype for just a moment, and we're back. Malcolm, continue with your thought that you had going on there.
Oh yeah, well, like I was saying, it's easy to call something a rich historical tapestry, but in Venice's case, it actually is true. You have a series of islands that were, probably never meant for this level of human habitation, right? And settled by people who are, avoiding tumultuous changes in the civilization around them, right? The transition. From the Roman Empire to the post-Roman Empire period, because of course it didn't fall so much as kind of disorganized, and not only thrive but grow into this world power, right? And something that punched above its weight politically and historically. It's something I really got introduced to when I was working on the Venice Chronicles, the social network that had that fantasy Venice setting, and
Yes.
And really, if you're in a dry spell in any sort of historical game, right, it's really kind of a go-to location, right, or even a contemporary game, right. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't get on a plane and go there, even if you're a vampire. You can go in a box, right?
Yeah.
So. I definitely recommend that Venice and that whole region. It's interesting on so many levels.
Well, I was running a Dark Ages game for a few years, and we'd just gone through the period of the Third Crusade, and the characters were just gravitating to Venice. With every chance they could go, they was getting ready to set up base there. Of course, with the onset of the Fourth Crusade, Venice really comes into a sudden massive blush of power. Mm-hmm. So for that entire period, a really exciting place and time to game in. And I visited it years ago, but I was a kid then, so certainly something. Some place worth going back to.
Oh, we'll definitely have to all check that out. And obviously, if anyone has any questions or they have any thoughts on this, just give us a shout out to email, darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. And let's move on to our next segment, the original or classic World of Darkness, the Ascension War Revisited.
Yes. Well, today on the show, we're going to be concentrating almost entirely on Mage, Mage the Ascension to begin with, and Mage the Awakening a little later on. And we're going to mix things up a little bit, show how you can take ideas from Awakening and put them in Ascension, and then later show how you can take some adventure ideas from Ascension and throw them into Awakening.
Now, Malcolm, you worked on the Ascension book?
Yes, I did.
How much input did you have on that book when you made it?
How much input did I have on that book? Well, for all of the Time of Judgment books, the format was very similar in that you had multiple options per game line, and none of them were really supposed to be official. Although developers kind of hemmed and hawed about that, and in the end, with Ascension, the one I worked on, Judgment, was supposed to be the storyline wrap up, basically. And I was fortunate because I, at the time, had been running my game, and I'd been running it pretty close to the canonical setting, so it was pretty easy for me to do the writing and the playtesting in tandem to get that done. That was a great experience, especially talking to Kathleen Ryan, who wrote all of the Amanda stories.
Oh, Matt, yeah.
I had this really productive, 6-hour phone call with her to sort of hash out where the characters she'd been using were coming from and what they were up to. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where the needs of a game, the needs of fiction are a bit different because there's a definite sort of end story for Amanda that unfortunately we couldn't do. It's probably if you ever meet Kathy, you could probably ask her about it.
Oh, cool.
But Amanda's role is sort of something that ended up being one that the sort of default play group, right, that's going through Judgment, kind of takes up, right? So that's sort of an example where you can't necessarily have fiction and play occupy the same space all the time, particularly when you have that big epic ending thing.
Okay. And Mark,
Cool.
Continue with what you were saying.
What to say about that? That it's been a few years, and the original Judgment scenario was about 50 or 60,000 words, and it had to be cut back quite a bit. Right? It was based on my Chronicle notes and a whole bunch of stuff. It was pretty crazy to go through, all of these books, right? There's the Salonica's prophecy in the Fragile Path, right? And I have to go and I have to address this, right? You can't drop a hook like that. Oh, the world's going to end, and babies are going to be lobotomized, and march in lockstep, and Tianim is going to cry forever. And if I don't talk about that, then that makes me a bit of a bitch, doesn't it? So it required quite a bit of poring through those old books to get it figured out. Though functionally, I think the main thing and the main idea that I thought was sort of at the heart of Age of the Ascension in the end was that being moral, being a good person is something that that can't be encompassed in political or theological or an economic belief system by itself, right? Morality is an end in of itself, and we use frameworks to get to that point, but it's so easy, and this is, I think, one of the themes of Age of the Ascension as a whole, to let that framework rule us, and to let that framework be a way to justify our baser desires, so to speak.
Right.
The desire for power over others, the desire to enforce one's will without that sense of compassion, personal responsibility, and responsibility for the well-being of others, right? And that's the critique of the critique of the technocracy is not really that it uses science, so it's bad. And I really wish people would shut the fuck up about that.
Yeah, me too.
But it's that, you do have, in the real world, you do have science not being used as science, but being used as a framework to justify policies of selfishness, right? Or
Right.
policies of, I guess, a sort of cold utilitarianism that is ultimately selfishness realized on a mass scale, right? I mean, that's where you have you have the Rand Corporation, right? You have nuclear deterrence strategy. You have modern management theory, quality assurance, right? I mean, it's not that, a bunch of us freelancers got together, right, and decided that, we hated flush toilets, but we liked video games, so fuck the technocracy and bring on the virtual adepts. Shouldn't have to play Xbox all day. It has more to do with that. But at the same time, one of the great things about looking deep and moving up is, we can talk about this, critique of a society where, the selfishness is framed and justified through the lens of technology, capitalism, political systems. But, several strata up from there, you end up with dudes in black suits and cyborgs you get to shoot.
Right.
Right.
Well, exactly. I mean, you have these ideas, but at the end of the day, you have to turn them into a game.
Right.
You have to turn them into a game. And people have to be able to engage it on several levels, right? You have to not only be able to have that, you do a parkour kickflip over the Hitmark's head, right? And then you blow his head off with your gun covered in self-adhesive Enochian characters, right? But you have to have more depth than that, because it's I think for most of us, you can't sustain interest in a game with nothing but the action adventure engagement, right? You need to be able to move around through those types of engagements with the game material to make it work for an extended chronicle.
Right.
Were we going to talk about how to pull ideas from
Mark?
I'm just kind of peeking out here. So,
Mark, how
Yeah,
how could we apply all this information to our game? You had some tips for everybody?
yeah, what's interesting about some of the stuff that Malcolm was saying is it echoes, it's echoed rather by some of the material to do with the Ascension War. These ideas turned into conflict. These ideas, these differing philosophies turned into material in game. And the Ascension War appears in both Mage the Ascension and in Mage the Awakening, and it's subtly different in both game lines. Now, for those who know Ascension, or for those who don't, in Mage the Ascension War is essentially an ongoing conflict for the future ascension of humanity, primarily between the traditions on the one hand and the technocracy on the other. Mage the Awakening also has this, but it's something different. And what I want to do is show how the Awakening version of the Ascension War can be applied to the original Mage the Ascension game. Now, for people who are familiar with Ascension but don't know the Awakening setting, there's a few bits of information to throw out here. Firstly, you need to look at the idea of exarchs and oracles in the supernal realms. Now, the supernal realms are, and Malcolm, you're going to step in and correct me if I mangle this here, but they're a higher reality, the source of magic, the true heavens, a plane of existence of which our universe is but a fallen corruption. Now, you can compare this with Mage the Ascension, which featured the Pure Ones, who were beings, entities, most of whom existed in an elevated state removed from our universe. Now, the Pure Ones may or may not be the source of avatars, the awakened, active part of a mage's soul. And I've always seen these as similar to the supernal concept from Mage the Awakening.
And it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that Bill Bridges was good enough to note, and I think sometimes gets lost when we talk about Awakening, is that the idea of the supernal realms are not just they're not just this place you go. They're not just in the sky, right?
No.
with these cool, gods and fae and things. With the idea is that it's supposed to be this this ultimate internal spiritual state, right? And there's the microcosm macrocosm concept, right?
Yeah.
Where where striving without is striving within, right? So that's a good insight, right? And so the supernal realms can they can fulfill the function of the avatar in many ways, because they are that state of being to which one strives, right?
Right.
As well as a place that you go to, right? Now, one of the things is that awakening sort of has a bias toward it being that place you go to, right? Just because it works on a narrative level in all sorts of ways, right? I mean, it's hard to describe, monsters coming out of your soul, but it's easy to describe them from coming from another plane of existence, right? So it makes it a little more accessible. But ultimately, it's the same place.
Right. And what struck me, if the pure ones are the source of magic, of mages' avatars, then the pure ones are therefore empowering subjective reality and differing paradigms. They're a part of a supernal reality that exists above and beyond the subjective realms experienced by mages, but at the same time they're creating those subjective realities. So from a certain perspective, in Ascension, the supernal is in a way even further removed from the world than it is in Awakening. It certainly seems harder to tap into. Not that it's easy in Awakening, but you know what I mean. Now, the Exarchs, these are ancient mages who ascended in lost times to the supernal. They took control of the heavens, of reality, and rewrote it to suit their own desires. And the Oracles of Awakening are other ascended mages who fight the Exarchs, kind of guerrilla style, trying to put right what the Exarchs have corrupted, or so they say. In the end, who really knows? Now, players of Mage of the Ascension will already be able to see some parallels here with the Ascension's oracles, the Aswadim, the Ascended Masters of the Order of Reason. So right away there, you've got enough parallels to see how the two concepts can equate to one another on a base level. Now, as for the Ascension War itself, as presented in Mage of the Awakening, it's a conflict waged by the Exarchs against their rivals. Actions of cabals in the mortal world are one manifestation of this war. Other conflicts take place in other realms far removed from this one, with spells and magics that would overturn history if used on Earth. Combatants might, for example, battle a rising god by denying him access to his cult, or thwart the plans of an Archmaster, or subvert religions, upend economies. In other words, exactly the kind of conflicts you'd expect the Oracles, the Aswadim, and the Ascended Masters to be involved with in Mage of the Ascension. So in essence, Awakening's Ascension War is like the Ascension War from Mage of the Ascension, but it's taken to a far grander scale and occurring on a far more elevated plane. Now, let's draw this back to the game table. How can we use this in game? Well, there's five immediate things that for me spring to mind right away. There's a thing called the Pax Arcanum, which is a series of rules, a set of rules that are agreed between combatants that keep the Ascension War from spilling over into the physical world. Now, all sides cheat to one degree or another, though. So there you go, there's an adventure seed right there, figuring out how to cheat at the Ascension War, how to break the Pax Arcanum and not get caught. You have hooks for adventures right away there. Another interesting idea is the concept of the Ochemata. That's Ochemata, if I'm mispronouncing that. Now, because the Exarchs are removed from the world by the Ascension War and by the Pax Arcanum, if they need to get themselves involved on a personal level, if they need to get their hands dirty, what they do is they take a fragment of their spirit, as it were, and send it down into the material world, and it takes on a form that's called an Ochemata. And it can look like anything. It can take a whole variety of disguises. So this is a way of having, I suppose, the forces against whom you're struggling actually manifest in the story. On the one hand, it can make cool opponents for powerful mages, but the Ochemata are super powerful and extremely dangerous, and you really wouldn't want to put one of those in your chronicle lightly. They also make interesting players behind the scenes, these enigmatic, shadowy figures, these reflections of gods that are cast upon the face of the world, changing everything around them simply by their mere presence. Now, what really interests me is when you start to mix things up a little bit further. The effects of the Ascension War, I think, can impact on the material world in interesting ways. Because the Ascension War takes place outside of our reality, so you can say that it takes place outside of time itself as we understand it. So its effects might not be felt in a chronological order. So, for an example, an exarch might strike against his rivals in the supernal realms. On Earth, this could be reflected as the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars in the early 13th century, for example. So his rival then strikes back, and this counterstrike manifests as the Permian-Triassic extinction event 250 million years ago. There's a further counterstrike, which then appears as, the fall of a country's government in the early 21st century. The idea being that the effects of the Ascension War are simply incomprehensible to mortals and to most mages too. And we do not see... Sorry, carry on.
Well, one thing to know is when I worked on the Archmaster there, one thing that I wanted to make sure was that there was always a role for your basic cabal, right? So there are, Earth is the place where you need, everybody needs stuff from Earth, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's one of the tricky things to design right around in Awakening, right? Is that is the world, the phenomenal universe is this dirty, crappy shadow of the supernal, right? But it still needs to be necessary for gameplay purposes.
Yeah.
So you have a couple of concepts there. Like one thing I introduced in the Seers of the Throne book is the idea that instead of the standard cosmological model that many mages and I think most fans assume, it could be that the fallen world is sort of the shield that the Exarchs use against the Abyss, right? They raised this thing up, right, to control what's beneath them, but that doesn't mean they're not afraid of it, right? Because
right.
It is the thing that is outside of their outside their rules and outside of their grasp, right? So instead of having the Abyss just be conceived of as this place between the fallen and the supernal, right? It can be this place. It can be the fallen world can be that layer around the supernal, and the Abyss can also be on the outside, right? Because
that's interesting.
They don't have any real spatial relationship, right? They only have symbolic relationships, right? So all of the maps that you have, all the maps that fans like to draw between, the Fallen, the Supernal, and Arcadia, and the other Arcadia, and and wherever demons come from, right? All of those are none of those are maps describing actual spatial relationships, right? They're describing only they're only describing conceptual and occult relationships, right? So you can have these multiple occult relationships, but that took me a bit off. What I was going to say is, there's that role that the fallen world plays. So if somebody monkeys with it in a way that lets the Abyss seep through and perhaps even touch the supernal, obviously the Exarchs or whoever else is in charge there, because God knows who's up there. Is probably not going to like that, especially if somebody finds some way to let the Abyss slip through in some selective way that maybe it doesn't kill everybody, maybe it just gets rid of the gentry because they're a real pain in the ass or something, right? But you also have quintessences, which are components that are needed for the really big magic, for the Imperial Mysteries, right? And those are things that you find in the fallen world, right? Sometimes they're difficult to find, and the easy way for a secret master to find them, of course, would be to walk in, blow a whole bunch of things up, and grab it. But of course, if he or she does that, then that's breaking the rules, right? and that's bad for everybody. And then everybody gets together and hits the reset button, and then some future civilization discovers magic and postulates that there once was a great magical civilization. Let's say called
Exactly. Yeah, well, I want to get onto that in just a minute because I had some interesting ideas about that in a moment.
But yeah, you can't forget, like, for tabletop play, you can't forget that the Fallen World is a shit. It's great. In that's where that's the arena that matters to you, right? So
That's where you play, exactly.
for the sake of those big maneuvers as well. So connecting those big maneuvers to stuff that's happening on the ground, not just in terms of the after effects, but also in terms of being able to build up these imperial spells, for example, right? Or it being necessary to have the Fallen World have some sort of characteristic in order for one side or the other to succeed, instead of having the Fallen World just take blowback, right?
Right.
That makes sense.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because Mage the Ascension already has something a little bit like this, an intrusion from the supernal that has manifest effects in the game world, specifically the Entelechy, an intrusion of the One into reality where it manifested on that. Was it the Night of Fana, I think it was called, with ripples that echo back and forth across time. So I thought it might be interesting to have more than one such event in the Ascension setting. Now, when you were working on the Ascension line, Malcolm, did you conceive of the Entelechy as a singular event? I mean, do you imagine there could be room for more than one such intrusion from the supernal, so to speak, or is there something about the nature of Telos and the Entelechy that requires it to be unique?
I think you could certainly have multiple events, but it gets hard to track these causal relationships when with the Entelechy, right? The event goes backwards and forwards through time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have some stuff that's kind of screwing with causality, right? The Entelechy exists to bring the One back into to bring the One into being, right? So that there's this complete cycle of experience, returning to and from Ascension. I think you could have multiple such events. In the context of the Ascension book, I think the way it works is because there's this sort of omega point for humanity at the end of it. If you're using that model, right, things sort of contribute to that. But at the same time, there's no reason not to have, say, an antithesis event, right? However, where that event would come from, see, in the context of Ascension, right? The Nefandi are, not the, they're not the badass guys bringing their Lovecraftian horror.
They're not the opposite. They're just,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're their motives are ultimately personal, right?
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're misinterpreting a sort of unmediated experience of the ground of being, right? The kind of other that you need for there to be this crazy consensual reality soup. You need a bowl to contain it in, right? And that bowl probably contains stuff like gravity and evolution and and all that other good stuff that allow us to be people and have experiences that are at all relatable to one another, instead of being funky Star Trek energy beings or whatever it would be if it really was totally subjective. So I plugged the Nefandi into that, and I know a lot of people didn't like that, but I thought it was important on a couple of levels, both because, and I guess we'll get into this in a little bit, I think the World of Darkness could stand to not keep grabbing stuff from Lovecraftiana, right. And
I just like the way that the Neverborn were kind of spun on their head in the final kind of sequence of Ascension. I thought that was really quite interesting to read.
Well, it comes from a very simple observation, right? Because you have these, like, oh, I'm a crazy Nefandi guy, and I like to, I like to eat babies on an altar, right?
Not wash my hands afterwards.
How much I love this Cthulhu clone that was created by a writer hitting a bunch of keys randomly. And the thing is, if you go to the source material, right, the mythos are not, they're not Satan with tentacles. They really don't care if you eat babies or are nice to babies. It's irrelevant to their experience. So I asked myself that question. Well, why are these Nefandi eating these babies at the altar, right? Or doing whatever other horrible things, right? And then I came up with a few ideas. Right? Part of it is that it's a nihilistic purging of one's own identities to get a kind of enlightenment, to reach that ground of being, right? And get to know that, but at the same time, that simply begs the question again, why is there some kind of metaphysical evil being served, when one is supposed to be appealing to these alien beings, right? They're alien, they're not evil, right? They, they represent the sort of death of the, anthropocentric mentality. Right? I know a lot of people who are Lovecraft scholars will disagree, but let's just pretend that I'm right here. This is impossible. I think the mythos that's strong enough to work with, right? It's the acceptance of a universe that is not all about us, right?
Right.
And that's something that's not evil. It's just true.
It's just indifferent and true. Yeah.
Mages are supposed to look for truth, and looking for truth is supposed to be something that's basically virtuous. So you can't have them be. You can't have a metaphysical source of evil really stand in the Ascension setting, right? For that reason.
Yeah.
Because you can only have evil persons. You can only have immoral persons. You can only have people be bad. So, getting back to having this sort of, let's say, you have this counter entelechy, right? Certainly, what Vorax is trying is an event like that, and you can easily shift something like that, where you have a mage go, well, fuck it, I'm going to, I'm going to break the rules, right? And you can project that into the past, right? Or or you can have it be another, decision by a person or a group of persons. I think in the Ascension setting, because it's about individual choices, it's about taking ownership of your own moral responses instead of relegating them to being part of this inevitable political, social, religious model, right? I think you also have to have the antagonists do the same thing if they're gonna create these big events that hold back the final enlightenment of humanity.
Yeah.
Or you
Cool.
can just ignore the implications of judgment, of what's in Ascension. You can have it not be that inevitable cycle, right? And you can have a bit more confusion as you have these well-intentioned people trying to, trigger the eschaton, right, and have it take place, have it fire off at various places in history, and have this legitimate question as to whether it's the right one. Or have the PCs try to somehow, chop them up and find the effects they like the best.
Yeah. Cool. Well, there's two more little nuggets I wanted to draw out of the Awakening style Ascension War for this section. Yes. One of those is native to Mage of the Ascension, and one is a little bit more Awakening in style. So the one that's more linked to Ascension would be the War of Ruins. Now, in Mage of the Ascension, this is a series of conflicts that brought down several prominent Horizon realms. Now, if you recast it in the light of Awakening's version of the Ascension War, The War of Ruins could then be a side effect of these conflicts that are occurring between the Exarchs, the Oracles, the Archmasters who serve them, the Aswadim, etc. Horizon Realms, whose creators or controllers become too closely tied to the Ascension War, can find themselves becoming casualties of that war. Now, this allows you to have powerful mages or archmasters who have deliberately hidden themselves away to avoid notice and avoid becoming embroiled in the Ascension War. Lesser mages, like the player characters, who encounter them may find it impossible to understand why these supposedly super powerful archmasters are hiding away from a conflict that has no apparent analog or correlate in the real world. So if you want to keep the idea from Mage Revised that the most powerful mages are now absent from the world, but you don't maybe like the rationales that are given in Revised, you can use Awakening's Ascension War instead as a reason why this is happening. And in the same vein, the Avatar Storm might simply be a side effect of some terrible conflict that spilled over from the supernal realms. It doesn't need to be related to exploding antediluvians and spirit nukes. You know, you can have the same effects through other methods as well. And finally, on that front, Awakening does a really good job of portraying the rewriting of history. The Ascension War can result in history itself being rewritten. So whole times, whole eras, places might be written out of existence. So the ruins, to use an example from Ascension, the ruins of the ancient city of Bat cannot be found because it no longer exists. In fact, it has now never existed. You can have certain truths or secrets that can have been completely removed from reality as if they never were. Now, such rewritings of history might not be complete, though. There may be relics of Bat still lingering here and there, embedded in the current version of history, like nuggets of buried gold. And if you're into crazy archaeological anomalies, you can compare this with those kind of anomalies that, talk about metal spheres found buried in ancient rock, or human footprints that have supposedly been found in sediment that dates back 50 million years. These could be relics of timelines that have now been erased. You can have mages who can remember these lost histories, wandering about the place, trying to understand what has happened to their world. And this kind of thing, for me, makes for excellent adventure fodder. Have the characters find a ruin dating from Lost Bat or Enoch or Atlantis. Its origins no longer exist, but the ruins remain. You can have the meta mage who remembers things that have been erased from the world, but who can provide lore that no one else knows, or they specifically have to go find somebody, the last survivor of a timeline that's long since vanished. Have the mages fighting to restore something that's been erased, or become involved in grand schemes to remove the past from existence. And I always think that this ties in well with Mage the Ascension's conflicting versions of history that are presented in the tradition books and the convention books, especially the earlier ones. Seen in this light, those various versions conflict with each other because everybody is remembering a different past. So basically, if you import Awakening's version of the Ascension War into Mage the Ascension, you're looking at a large-scale backdrop here, but one that can inform play down to the level of individual cabals and provide countless opportunities for adventure seeds, as we've just seen over the last few minutes. The Exarchs, they make an interesting replacement or addition to the technocracy. Now, in Awakening, the Exarchs, these gods that are hiding out in the supernal, they're served in the material world by an order of mages called the Seers of the Throne. Malcolm mentioned them briefly just now. The Seers of the Throne fulfill many of the same functions as the technocracy, but they add a few more options into the mix. You could, for example, and this has been done to one degree or another in Awakening, you could make the technocracy just one part of the Seers of the Throne, or one of its ministries. Maybe you don't like the technocracy, or you want something on a grander or scarier scale, or maybe you just love Awakening's background, but prefer Ascension's rules and want to import it into the older game. Or maybe you like the Jail of Night articles that we featured a couple of shows ago and want more examples of how to use that kind of Gnostic setting in play. If so, Mage the Awakening's Ascension War is for you. I've been using something similar in my own Ascension games, and I'm finding it hits the mark 9 times out of 10 anyway. If you want direct source material, you want to check out the books, specifically Seers of the Throne, Secrets of the Ruined Temple, and Reign of the Exarchs, for stuff that you can plug into your game immediately. Now, Malcolm, you've worked on a number of books in the Awakening line. Are there others that you would recommend beyond those three to get information on the Ascension War and using it in your game?
Using it in your your Ascension game or your?
Yeah, in your Ascension game to fold it back.
Yes.
Well, one of the things you were mentioning earlier about these lost histories, I think that's interesting because it's something Bill Bridges and I talked about when I was working on the Judgment scenario for Ascension, and also for the Sons of Ether revised tradition book, because there's
Song of Argo, yeah.
There's quite a bit of time travel in there, and it was Bill's position that basically, when you had these alternate timelines, typically what would happen is they might leave some stuff in the material world, but they eventually sort of get shunted off into the Umbra. Too. So you have these umbral realms that are these developed alt histories, right? And and the more divergent they get, the more they sort of get shunted off further and further until they might be the seed of a more developed alternate universe. Sort of like the way the Marauders, the crazier they get, the more distant they get from reality, until they might become the seeds of their own universes out there somewhere. And that's something that's talked about in the Ascension book too. In the 5th chapter, there's a whole bunch of resources, and one of them is reconciling the various versions of the World of Darkness, right? By using this sort of occult alt history, parallel world concept. Right, and there's a bit of a discussion of that. For Awakening, for World of Darkness, that's a good question. I think. No, you got me. I'm drawing a blank.
That's all right.
I'll probably think of something when we're in the middle of something else.
That's fine. Anyway,
Cool.
as always, drop us. Yeah.
Reliquary. I think that would be a good one.
Okay, Reliquary. All right.
Yeah. And anything with items, right? Also, Mysterious Places.
That is very good. Yes,
Yeah,
that would work well.
because, it's a great way to justify these things is to have them be these fragments of other histories.
Cool.
I used actually a statue from Mysterious Places in my game, and it was quite successful. And it was eventually going to turn into something very much like this, where there is another history coming through, right, through the medium of this statue. But right now, my own World of Darkness game is on hold. So those are my suggestions.
Okay, great.
All right, good one.
Thanks for your suggestions. And as always, drop us a line at darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. And you can hit us up at darkerdays.tk. And let us know how your experiences work out. Just tell us about how your games are going. And just if you have any questions for Malcolm, of course, we can forward on to them and see what he has to say about that. And we will be right back after this.
Listening to the Darker Days podcast. More fun than being smacked in the head with a wooden board.
All right, folks, we're back, and Darker Days Radio with Mark and Vince and our special guest, Malcolm Shepard.
How you doing?
Welcome back. We're going to be moving on to our new World of Darkness, or the current World of Darkness segment, and we have some information about that, the Loom of Fate. Right, Mark?
Yes, indeed. Just as we took some ideas from Mage of the Awakening and threw them back through the years to Mage of the Ascension, right now we're going to reach back into the misty purple past and pull out the Loom of Fate adventure for you. And our Loom of Fate was the first full adventure for Mage of the Ascension, not counting the little one that came bundled with the storytelling screen. Came out in 1993. And its opening chapter was actually featured in the back of Mage of the Ascension First Edition, so we were all primed and ready for its release. It's about a girl called Norna Weaver who is destined to be transformed into a spirit to replace an aged and dying entity that is holding together the spiritual underpinnings of San Francisco. It's about the factions that want her to be transformed, those who don't, and it's about the player characters caught in the middle. And what we're going to do here is take a look at this adventure and show you how, in fact, you can plug this into your Mage the Awakening Chronicle with just a tiniest little bit of tweaking. Now, it's still available through various secondhand outlets. You can buy the PDF from DriveThruRPG for only $5. It's also available as part of the Mage Chronicles Volume 3 bundle, which costs you a little bit more, $8.98. And in that case, if you bought the bundle, your extra $3.98 would also get you Chaos Factor, which is another early Mage adventure featuring Samuel Hay. So I'll leave you to decide whether that's worth the extra money.
It's always worth every penny.
Put my copy out of my shelf now.
Oh, you are? Cool.
I am. Oh, look at Sammy there. He looks unhappy.
He's always unhappy. He's in the old world of darkness. Now, Loom of Fate opens with extensive background details on the spiritual state of play in the city. It's tied heavily to Ascension's cosmology and, by default, that of Werewolf the Apocalypse, on which it's based. Now, Awakening players, you can pretty much ignore this and simplify it thus. Basically, it's this. An ancient spirit called Cobb underlies San Francisco, or whatever your home city is in your chronicle, and Cobb is dying. Cobb's decline is causing real problems for the city above. Now, in San Francisco, this is obviously earthquakes and the like, but you can recast this however you like. Riots, unrest, political corruption, disease, whatever. The idea is that the material reflects the spiritual, and when one suffers, so does the other. Now, in the original Ascension version of the adventure, the Technocracy wants to fix this problem. They're grooming a mortal mage to replace Cobb. Specifically, they're grooming Norna Weaver. Marauders, who are mages given over to chaos and madness, they want Cobb to die. Chaos will result. Yay, Discordia! Norna doesn't know where she stands, and it's for the player characters to help her choose her fate. So, the interplay between chaos and order, freedom and control, destiny and free will, these are the central themes of Loom of Fate. Now, it has a few features or bugs, depending on how you want to look at it. Because it's an early mage, the Ascension adventure, it has lots of mages in it. In fact, all the NPCs are mages. All of them. Norna is a mage. The people who want to convert her, they're mages. Her priest is a mage. Even the local reporter is a mage. In fact, the local reporter is a cyborg mage. Oh, wait, Norna's mum isn't a mage, although she is a clone. So you might want to strip this back. I'd scale down the number of mages in the adventure, keep the mages special, keep them rare. You can probably do without the cyborg, for example. As a political group, the traditions, the 9 traditions, are non-existent, more or less, because it's early mage. They hadn't really started to develop them as political entities yet. So for Awakening players, you might want to consider removing the Concilium and the Pentacle Orders, or consigning them to the background, given it's a tale about the individuals. However, there are ways to keep them in play, primarily by replacing the Technocracy with the Concilium, with the Pentacle Orders. So now it's the local Concilium that wants Norna to replace Cobb in order to save the city. And all of a sudden, your supposed villains are not so easily labeled. It gives you more interesting moral dilemmas to play with. The adventure proper opens with a car crash that demonstrates Norna's unconscious powers, identifies her as a mage, and a figure of importance. Now, you can use this in Awakening pretty much as is. Note the presence of the cyborg mage reporter, though. And also note that the Marauder mages put in an appearance here. And they're portrayed as a kind of crazy Mad Max science fiction biker gang. I'd drop them...
One of them looks like Briarios from Appleseed.
Yeah. I'd drop them from this scene no matter what version of mage I was running, because they're really rather silly. If you need to use them, you can replace them with Chaos Spirits, a cabal of Discordian mages, or even the Celesti might work. I don't know, Malcolm, you're probably more familiar with Awakening on this front than me. What would you recommend as a good replacement for Marauders that keeps some of the feel from Ascension but works in Awakening?
You know what? I might make them actual spirits. Right? Or because this is the crossover friendly newer World of Darkness. Fuck it, make them werewolves.
Cool.
Pure. Right?
Pure, yeah.
If you have this situation where San Francisco is supposed to get earthquaked to death, right? And the only reason it's not that's not happening is for the convenience of the monkey meat puppets standing on it. Well, that's a problem that should be fixed, right?
Interesting.
And even for kind of more conventional group of werewolves, you do have this dilemma where you have this blatantly sort of artificial spirit ecology compromising event that will nevertheless keep a whole bunch of people alive. So the characters can ask themselves where their values lie, and it makes it an interesting question, especially if you want to get back into the zesty ecology-minded feel of werewolf that might steal a few cues from Apocalypse. So we're having a meta cross inspiration thing.
Cool.
But,
a good one.
you have the interest of the spirit ecology against what's good for people in a very palpable way, right? So I think it'd be good for them for that motorcycle. Then again, robots on motorcycles does kick ass, so I don't get rid of them too.
It's true. Well, when I first, sorry, carry on.
Well, I'm looking through it right now, and mutant alligators, man.
Yeah, I was gonna get to them later. But
I don't know. I think making it the local Consilium is a great idea. I think this would be a great way to do Mysterium as bad guys, because they're the order that's probably one of the hardest to do as bad guys. Right? Because, basically this is occult mad science that's going on here. It's the sort of thing the Mysterium is equipped to do. And it's exactly the sort of thing where, they can easily see themselves being in the right,
exactly.
by sacrificing this one individual to fix it.
No, another good one to use here in this opening scene of the car crash is the spirit of 6th Avenue and Lake Street from the Summoners book, which, as regular listeners will know, I just loved to bits when I reviewed it a couple of episodes ago.
Yeah.
It's a spirit of an accident black spot and fits really well here.
Oh, that's a great.
Now from here, yeah, it is. It's fantastic. Now from here we move on to a scene of confrontation with Norna's priest. Now this one is awesome, and you can keep this scene intact, pretty much unchanged. Norna's priest, Father Williams, was once selected to replace Cobb, but the transformation process went wrong, and he's now this awful part spider mutant who hides his arachnoid features beneath his priestly robes. It's a great little scene, and I think you would fuck with that at your peril, because it's really fantastic and makes a great horror blip in the first part of the adventure. There's also a great scene with a fortune teller who uses the tarot to foreshadow the events of the story. And this was actually before the Mage Tarot was released. So the adventure presents its own version of the tarot at the back, tailored to the events of the story. And of course, you can use the tarot decks that were made either for Awakening or Ascension with only a little work. There's a section on investigations that has a brief discussion of local mage cabals. Now, these you could port directly over into Awakening. There's only a paragraph or two of detail on them. It's good, especially if you believe that no mage game is complete without the club way down. Or you could replace them with cabals from your own chronicle with no problem. There's also detailed coverage of the local Umbra, which in Awakening would, I guess, best be represented by the Shadow Realm. There's some interesting stuff there, and I'd say you could keep that probably intact. Although you might not want to use elements like Ascension's pattern web, but tailor your descriptions to Awakening's cosmology. One other scene that I think has got to be included is one set at Norna's house. And in the original adventure, her parents were murdered by the Technocracy when they tried to prevent the Technocracy from using Norna in their schemes to replace Cobb. So her father's dead, and her mother was replaced by a clone. Now, maybe you don't want to use the idea of a clone. If so, I'd say consider making her some kind of golem or simulacrum or other magical construct. This really helps reinforce the horror of the scene when the characters discover the mother's real body stowed away in the attic, preferably while the rest of the Cabal are sharing milk and cookies with the cloned version down in the kitchen. It's a great scene with real tension and creepiness. It works really nicely. It's followed by a fantastic scene talking to her father's ghost at a local cemetery. You can use this again as is. There's a great bit of exposition there and includes excellent advice on having the ghost possess one of the characters, and shows you how you can get the player of the possessed character to impart useful info in play. And that's just good advice for ghosts and possessions in games anywhere. The Marauder biker gang from space make another appearance here, but if you go with Malcolm's cool suggestion of maybe representing them with spirits or the pure, which I really love that, they can fit in quite well, actually. Now, speaking of the Concilium, there's an interesting cutscene in the adventure that shows the deliberation of the Technocracy Symposium regarding the Norna Weaver situation. For Awakening, this is a great place to feature the Concilium. The possibility exists for the characters to gatecrash the gathering, and in Ascension, this inevitably turned into a cyborg-laden bloodbath. Well, unless you axe the scene like I always have. But for Awakening, you can get real mileage out of this, especially for the more politically minded mages in your cabal. Unlike Ascension, where I never felt the scene worked, in Awakening, it's actually a fantastic addition to the adventure. And there's also a potential invitation to a meeting with the head of the project, Dr. Ken Himitsu, which works really well in this context if you replace him with a powerful Concilium mage who takes the characters off to one side and explains to them, look guys, we need your help here, and lays it on the line, and that puts the moral dilemma front and center for the characters. Now, there's also a good deal of old-style Mage of the Ascension wackiness in the scenes that follow here that you may want to ignore or adapt as you see fit. Things like the cyborg mage journalist's home apartment, a local hospital with crazy magical technology machinery all over it, a hidden laboratory tucked away in the spirit world. Check out the tone of your home game and decide whether you want to keep these intact. For a grittier feel, they're probably a bit too over the top, but you may well find inspiration there for stuff that you can use, and if you're willing to play a little bit more fast and loose, it's cool stuff. It's good fun. Now, from there, you're moving toward the climax of the adventure. There's strong attention paid to dealing with Norna and her own opinions on the matter. Does she accept her fate to save the city from disaster? Does she reject it, preferring not to be transformed into an immortal spider monster? How do the characters respond to her choice? Do they dare go against the local Concilium to save Norna? Do they force Norna's hand in order to win political capital with their superiors? These choices, at the end of the day, they're at the very heart of the story, and you should be sure to give them the space and time they need. So the finale, therefore, is quite open. We're given plenty of details on Cobb and his realm and what the characters might do there. There's full coverage of the Technocracy's base where the transformation will be carried out. And if you're replacing the Technocracy with more occult-minded mages or the Concilium, you could need to recast this section out of whole cloth. Or you could portray it as containing machines created from ancient Atlantean sciences. You could even send the characters off on a side quest to recover machines capable of carrying out Norna's transformation. So there's plenty there to work with. And of course, with the alternate possible outcomes, the adventure presents a number of alternate resolutions for Norna and the city as a whole. If Norna flees or is killed, of course, you're looking at potential disaster for your home city. But, maybe that's something you could roll with. It makes for interesting sequels, after all. And if she agrees to the transformation or has it forced upon her, you can resolve the adventure with some really nice twists on the themes of control and freedom and choice and destiny. And these are going to be themes that will resonate with your players given what their characters have gone through to get this far. So there you have it, Loom of Fate, an underrated classic, I think, but not without its flaws, or cyborgs, or bikers, or, mutant alligators. But where the whole really does transcend the sum of its parts. And as we have seen, it's remarkably easy to translate into Awakening terms. So check it out. Weave your own stories at the Loom, and let us know how you get on.
Excellent. Definitely pick that up through DriveThruRPG, and let us know. Go to the forums, wildgamesproductions.com/forums. Tell us about your experiences. We'd love to hear about it.
And it's a good scan. It's some of them aren't great quality. This one's good quality. It's readable, printable. It's good stuff.
Excellent. Now let us move along and go to the question and answer period of the show. Everyone's been waiting for this. We have tons of people come to the forums. We've been broadcasting on Twitter for quite some time. And let's go to the first question. Mark, want to nab that first question from Gotham Lord?
Question from Gotham Lord. He wanted to know what are some of your influences, Malcolm, for the design of Mage the Awakening and the rest of its continued line of books?
That's a good question. I think when Bill was sort of corralling us to start working on Mage, it was back in it was a few years ago, and we started sending email back and forth. We had one meeting at Gen Con for about an hour to try and hash things out to make sure we were all kind of on the same page in terms of sort of design objectives and everything, right? I mean, really, this is very much Bill Bridges. Bill Bridges is a real smart guy, and he has a particularly good grasp of mythology and symbolism. And so we ended up going through, I think we designed this game like 3 times, right? So there were really sort of 3 Mage of the Awakenings that got designed practically from start to finish.
Wow.
And sort of by the 3rd iteration, Bill really pinned down what would work in sort of having a game about the occult that had some sort of mythic resonance, but was also accessible, right? Because that was always one of the problems with Mage the Ascension, right? It's very easy to sit around and talk about it on the internet all day and never play it. And
That's true.
and so we wanted to get out of that, and so I mean, I can't really speak so much to Bill's influences, although I know he has a tremendous education on these things. I know one thing we batted around a lot was the Invisibles.
Oh yeah.
We're all huge fans of that. Well, maybe we're all huge fans, but we're really familiar with it, and I'm a big fan of it. And the fact that we wanted to get that that idea of searching for truth, but not necessarily searching for it through how do I put it? Through conventional ideas about spiritual purity, right? Which, if you're familiar with the Invisibles, it's all about that. I think one thing that maybe could be emphasized more in Awakening now is that unconventional approach, right? Because I think there's a tendency to really think of Awakening as the stuffy wizard's game, right? It's where we all dress up in suits and we charge our magic circles and we read our books, and it's not really about that. It's a little more dynamic. Mages are a little more interesting than that. There are people who've had this tremendous initial experience of self-realization, right? Where they know who they are, and they know that many things around them are false, right? Are false, and they're damaged in some sense, right? And they're left with, a certain amount of power over the sort of damaged, foggy half-world that they now experience around them. And what it brings up is, what do I owe this piece of shit universe? Essentially.
Yeah.
Right. And, reconnecting and rejoining oneself with the supernal, I think, is very much a part. Part of that is again, I know I keep coming back to this compassion thing, right? But that's my own bias. And so I think the theme is very much, and you'll see this in the Invisibles too in the last volume, where I don't know how familiar people are with the series, right? But it's it's about a bunch of anarchist occultists who may or may not be a part of a worldwide conspiracy, that's bound into the higher realms, who are fighting the forces of the outer church, who represent control and spiritual pollution and abasing oneself and all kinds of bad stuff. But toward the end of it, what you realize is that bad stuff is in a sense necessary, right? So you have the protagonist you have one of the main protagonists, King Mog, who starts out being your two-gun badass who shoots Delta Force operators in the face to steal artifacts from underground bases in New Mexico, right? And in the end, right, he becomes a suit, right? He becomes part of that corporate culture, and he becomes the object of rebellion instead of the rebel. Right? After that, it becomes very difficult to describe because so much of it is based on Grant Morrison taking great deal of drugs and seeing UFOs. But but that reconciliation is a big deal. So that would be one thing. I know a lot of people think of. I know a lot of people get ideas from the Dresden Files for their Mage games, but I've never read them. There's a Dresden Files game coming out, and I think it'll probably be pretty good, but it wasn't something that was being batted back and forth.
We were talking about that just before the show, actually, Vince and I.
It's a good read so far.
Certainly the Books of Magic comic series.
Oh. Yeah, Neil Gaiman, yeah.
And that's one where there is a description of what Atlantis is like and what it is for. That that's what Atlantis is like in Mage and what it is for. Right?
Yeah, I like the reference in there to Shadow Atlantises and False Atlantises, and that's quite cool.
Yeah, that you have this symbol of the past that underlines the fact that we people can get together and create something glorious, right? That we can be wise not just individually but collectively, and that's something that whether or not it's real, right? The persistence of that idea is important. What else? I mean, to be honest, I don't read a lot of occult themed horror. I read a lot of horror, but not a lot of occult themed horror.
Well, I mean, it's clear that Gnosticism has had a strong play in Mage the Awakening, and I was wondering. Did the Jail of Night series of articles, I don't know if you're familiar with those from White Wolf's Phobia magazine back in the day, did the Gnosticism come into the world of darkness through that line, or was it just through a more traditional approach from Gnostic philosophy and religion? Were those articles mentioned? Were they floated around the table at all? Or?
Well, the funny thing is that there's very little direct conversation about Gnosticism, about having a Gnostic theme, right? It's sort of more of an emergent quality of what was necessary to get this game working. I do remember the Jail of Night articles. I managed to skim one of them because my university roommate collected White Wolf magazine, so I managed to skim through one once, and I know they exist. And
well, they're hosted on the Cult site right now, actually.
Are they hosted on the Cult site? Oh, that's fantastic.
There's a link on our front page.
Okay, that's great. I actually just pulled out the first edition of Cult recently. I had it on my shelf, and I'm going through it again. And despite the weirdness in the way it's translated, it's a really evocative game. It's just fantastic. I can't speak to future edition. I'm talking about the one where the angel's getting chopped in half. But no, that didn't. The Jail of Night articles didn't really come into it, as far as I know. But every freelancer, everyone involved, they're always bringing their own experiences and what they've read, right? So you may keep asking, you may hit on someone who's done that, and certainly, with someone like with Bill Bridges at the helm for the design and development, he was around during that era, and he might have more than a passing familiarity. He would be a great guy to interview, by the way, if you can grab him.
Yes, I would like to.
I know he's pretty busy, but with the Gnostic theme, there are some differences from Gnosticism, right? And that there isn't really, there's not really the good guy God up there, right? There's us and our works. It might be, it does have a sort of Platonic thing up there, right? Because the supernal worlds are very much the Platonic ensemble pure form through which truth is derived, right? So that's definitely an influence. But I know with my own personal background, because my family is Buddhist, I always looked at that stuff, and it was there's a very, very different point of view in that tradition, right? Where you have shunyata, right? You have the idea that because we need to have this dialectical relationship with things to understand it, right? We have to have me and not me, and book and not, and thing and not. Right? But these are arbitrary functional categories that we use, that we mistake for the truth, right? We have this field of ideas that is in some sense false but functional, right? And we also have what's true, but what's true is something that is not really amenable to words.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
it's composed of the same stuff, right? The me and the book and all of this. So I always look at working on this as I know the Gnostic theme is there and I want to work on it, but I want to leave room for the kinds of things that resonate with my own experience. So I've always tried to kind of imply in my writing that that there are things about the fallen world that that are not that the fallen world is not entirely shit, right?
Yes.
And that's something where, for example, you get the free council, right? Where you have that. All right, it's not so much that the fallen world is degraded; it's that it's a reconfiguration of these supernal emanations, right? And those new configurations may have new ideas and new truths, and so it's not that the Gnostic theme isn't there. It's that it is there, and it's there strongly, but it's being approached from a non-traditional point of view, and one that leaves open questions about its validity. Says,
cool.
Look at it.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said a minute ago, if you want to check out those articles, if you scroll down on our front page, around about episode 6, there's a link to where they're hosted right now.
Excellent.
Okay, now Vince, you want to take Zorlak's questions? He has a set of 6 questions that he puts to pretty much all our listeners. So.
Yeah, I'm just going to condense a couple of them.
Okay.
What is your favorite World Darkness book, new or old?
Oh, geez.
You have to pick one book.
I have to pick one book? Oh, fuck, man.
Yeah, the house is on fire. You run
Everybody
out.
hates this one. I love it.
The house is on fire.
You got to grab one WAD book out of your collection that's your favorite. Which one?
Okay. Okay. I guess I'll grab. Oh no, that doesn't count. That Flying Rabbit. Yeah, I was gonna grab my copy of Ars Magica second and take off because that's the seed for all this great stuff that's happened since, right? And because I feel like with Ars Magica, I kind of have this creature that I can mutate into all of the subsequent games by taking and extending those ideas. But that's a cheat because it's just before White Wolf, right? Even though there's a White Wolf edition of ours, it's too long. I fell asleep reading it.
Nice.
Who wants 100 pages on Lab? Ars Magica? I mean, I know there's some real grief for that shit, but I mean, come on. I guess
The house is burning.
Yeah.
The house is burning, and I...
You're in the corner, the cat's meowing. Oh, you know what? I'll grab Mummy, because I always wanted another kick at that.
Cool.
Alright.
Right, it's not necessarily my favorite, but it's the one that I'll do novel things with.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right, now say the house is not on fire, and you have your whole collection there in front of you, including World of Darkness and everything else. What is your favorite system that is not World of Darkness?
My favorite system that is not World of Darkness?
That you would play other than World of Darkness, yeah.
Well, right now I'm running a game set in about 5000 C. It's this transhuman game set on a Dyson Sphere, and I'm using a tweaked version of the Adventure rule system, and I'm quite fond of that right now. Although I've been hacking the system as time goes on. There's so many, but that's a little too close. Right now I'm playing 4th edition D&D, and I'm enjoying that. I think, I can't really tell you I have a favorite because different games do different things. I don't really have a game that I fall back to anymore. Right? I mean, I used to, right? I mean, and it used to be Mage.
Right.
But I've tried to really stretch myself because I feel, as someone who works in game design, I want to experience as many different cool games as possible. So I've kind of trained myself out of having the go-to system now. So I'm sorry I can't answer that. I'm really copping out. Sorry.
Oh. He also asked if you read comic books, and what is your favorite comic book to read when you're just lazing back and relaxing?
I'm just lazing back and relaxing.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I got together with my gaming group yesterday, and we watched X-Men Origins Wolverine, and that was terrible. But it was good to have my friends there to yell at the television. And certainly, I like the Morrison run of X-Men. Mm-hmm. It's the great one where they do Jarn and all those ideas that they proceed to retcon right away. Where Cyclops is finally interesting because he's having psychic better sex with the White Queen dressed up as the Phoenix. I think that's great. That's the bee's knees.
The bee's
Nice. But I'm not much into the X-Men in general. I just like that run. I suppose for comics, the last one I really got into was the Authority. But again, with me in comics, it's usually I'm usually waiting. I usually get something about 3 or 4 years after it's done.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. You get the graphic novels usually.
Yeah, I get them, or my wife picks up something. She's quite a fan of those sorts of things.
Okay. Interesting. And why do you love role-playing games so much, he wants to know?
Oh, okay. I was actually looking forward to answering this one.
Okay.
I think there's, as gamers, as people who role-play, we're part of this hobby that is, either assumed to be a video game or not well understood. And, of course, in the 80s and 90s, we took a lot of shit, right? Because, it's that nerdy hobby. I think, however, there's a tendency now to lose what I feel is the great thing the role-playing form does. Because we have that lingering change, so we go, well, why can't this game be more like literature or like a play? And you see a lot of new design movements in role-playing going to that, right? And so you get these games that are like literature or like a play, except they're like bad books and bad plays because they're following structure that they learned in high school or first year university English, right? Where you have your plot arc and your writing tension, you have things that strictly must be resolved, and you have all that bullshit. And I don't think role-playing is about that. I don't think role-playing is about emulating another medium. I think role-playing is about being its own medium. When you try to make an RPG be like a movie, or be like a book, or be like anything else. What you're basically saying is, role-playing sucks, and you should read a book, or watch a movie, or do any of those things. Fuck that. Okay? Instead, I think what is vital to game well, to understand tabletop RPGs, is to understand what the medium is for. And it's not for neatly tying up the loose ends in your plot. It's not for a conventional plot structure with rising tension. You can use those as tools, right? But you have this other factor. You have your group. You have them making their own decisions. You have this tension between your desires and theirs, right? And you have this great creative process where that tension resolves itself. And I think ultimately the purpose of it, the thing I love about it, is the fact that it creates experiences that, while entirely fictional, feel sincere, right? Because they have the same confused, disorganized, multifaceted elements as a genuine experience, right? Because narrative, the idea of story is, story is bullshit. Okay, yeah, they're called storytelling games, but story as a concept, it's garbage, right? It's false, it's fake. Your experiences are real. Later you turn them into stories so that you can share them, so you can make sense of them, so you can learn something from them. But the truth of the matter is that direct experience is confused. You look at it through several angles. Things don't quite add up. It doesn't have a theme. You add a theme post hoc. And that, I think, is the great thing about RPGs, is the fact that we get this kind of drinking from the fire hose of simulated experience, and after that it's up to us to create a narrative, just like actual experience. That's why I love RPGs.
Wow, fantastic.
Interesting. Okay, we'll move on to our next set of questions. Mark, went ahead and the Laminated Wisp.
Yeah. This is from Lamented Whisper. He's got a couple of questions here. He wants to know, what was your favorite part about working on Hunter the Vigil?
Oh, geez. Well, I only worked on a couple of books. I worked on Night Stalkers and the Horror Recognition Guide. I think my favorite thing was working on the Horror Recognition Guide on a couple of levels. First of all, people seem to really like it. Thank you. Secondly, I got to write in a long form I haven't gotten to do for White Wolf in quite some time, right? Now, when I was working on Maze, you not only write the splat book or whatever, you write a novella to explain it, right? Now, the trouble is in something like Mage, the game fiction is very functional in that, you have to do this, thing where, the apprentice goes up and goes, "Why do we believe this?" And the master goes, "Well, Billy, we think we should be killing people because they've outlived their karmic usefulness. Blah, 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 blah," right? And one of the great challenges in Mage was actually to break that format. But in the Horror Recognition Guide, I got to write something where Chuck was great about setting its purpose as something we could easily write legitimate fiction around, right? Because it was, you take a look at a type of antagonist, right? Yeah, that's something hunters would face, and that's it. And you make sure you do it through, from their point of view, and that you muddle things up enough so that people can think something other than, oh, well, there's a cabal of Seers of the Throne, right? That they can do something other than that. And so within those very loose restrictions, I was able to write what I thought was some pretty nice fiction, and people responded to it. Right?
Cool.
Also, David Hill wrote a great SAS adventure based based on stuff that I wrote. The Razor Kids thing in the Horror Recognition Guide, and it was great to work on that and then have something even better come from that, because I think he just did a bang up job. So having something be more than the sum of its parts like that is very rewarding.
That's nice. Lamented Whisper also wants to know, would you be interested in doing a Hunter book for Changelings, if there ever comes to be one?
Sure, why not? I like getting paid.
Cool.
No, I think it's an interesting topic, but, one of the things you'll discover about freelancers is they don't, there are very few things I will turn down.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's just the way things are. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to do. Seriously.
I did have a curious question that came to mind, and if you can't answer it, that's fine. When you're developing a book for White Wolf, they come to you with an idea and they want you to develop a book. Would you be able to? Do you pick the writers that are involved with it, or they just say, "Here's what they're doing, and we want these people to work on it," and work with them?
Well, you'd have to ask somebody who's developed for that. I've never done any developing.
Oh.
No. I think as a writer, I've occasionally added a pretty strong direction to some books and some things and some lines, simply because I've had the chance to, apply my experience, because you have developers who are very cool about letting some fairly intense collaboration happen, right? And also in the case of some games, like Mage, it's just because I was around a whole lot to work on them.
Yeah.
I would love to develop a book. And if you think I should develop a book, feel free to contact White Wolf /CCP North America. Tell them that.
Or
I think
contact Eddie Webb.
I think it would be a blast. I think for the developers, I'm not sure how much say they have in picking writers. I think all of them do have some say in it. It might depend on whether. I think if you're in-house, you have a little more control over that.
Right.
So, but that's something you really want to forward to somebody who's done it, like Chuck or Ethan or or Matt.
We had Matt. Matt was talking about developing I think it was our first interviewee. He had some interesting stuff to say on that. Now, you mentioned Venice Chronicles earlier on. One of our listeners, J.M. Mariano, had a couple of questions about those. He was asking how your experience working in the Venice Chronicles social network influenced your work in role-playing games.
Okay, that's a good question. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Venice Chronicles was an experimental social network that I worked on a couple of years ago, and the idea was to build a social network using the principles of kind of forum and chat-based RPGs, right? And that the idea was that would break the ice and allow for sort of rich content participation in this social network. Now, it ended up not. It ended up kind of mutating over time because it's not just a game; it was a business, right? And ultimately, it was sort of a test of concept for this this rich research social networking system. But the idea was that it was set in fictional Venice with a number of great houses, right? And each of the houses had access to esoteric abilities based on virtues and sins, right? And these were handled narratively, and the idea is that you'd be creating a lot of user-generated content to gain the sort of in-system currency, because it was a micropayment-based social network. And you do that by submitting videos, by following along in the ARG, the alternate reality game that we worked on to accompany it, and so on and so forth. I think its experience in terms of, which is what I work on now, is it's made me really appreciate the kind of feedback that you can get from live play communities and different media. For example, what's happening in the LARP community, in chat games, and so on and so forth, and especially with chat games and with forum games, because there's been such a huge explosion in that, particularly related to fandom, right? There's this whole section of role playing that it seems that us old tabletoppers don't seem to be really interested in going out and engaging, right? And they have their own sort of functional rules and customs and ways of doing things, and I think for bringing it back to tabletop play, I've always thought of looking at those as sort of simulated societies and simulated cultures. So if I see something that in the Camarilla is a big idea that gets a lot of traction, certainly I'll see that as something inspiring for my writing. And similarly, when I've written things for lines, I've also thought of how that's going to work in different gaming media, right? How it's going to work in a chat, or how it's going to work in a LARP. For example, in the Silver Ladder book, you have your convocations, right? If you remember those, right, where a bunch of mages from different cities meet, and there are a whole bunch of traditions that you follow. And one of the things that was very much in my mind is, if I write this stuff, right, the CAM is going to actually run these at some point, right? So whatever I work on, right, is going to, it's going to form the basis for some kind of Camarilla Roberts rules for how people pretend to get together in very large groups of mages. So it was interesting to think of that, right? So, for example, I had different days, right, where you deliberate different things, right? And that's why I said they don't have to be actual days, right? Because nobody's going to sit around a LARP for a week just because the book says they do.
Yeah.
And it's better not to try and get the poor narrators and storytellers on the ground to start tweaking things, right? Just because I didn't think of that side of it.
Cool.
Okay.
Did you share any of your experiences and lessons learned while working on Venice Chronicles with, say, the team currently working on the World of Darkness Online MMO game, or do you not really have much contact with those guys?
No, I don't have much contact with them. I am working on an MMO right now for a client, but it doesn't have to do with White Wolf CCP. It is a freelance job, however, and certainly if you'd like to see me work on the World of Darkness MMO, just send your mail too.
Have you got specific ideas concerning what would make a World of Darkness MMO successful, or?
I think one of the things that's important is, first of all, to have a good, robust mythology that appreciates,
like a strong shared world.
A strong shared world, right? And the kind of thing that I know in Requiem development has certainly been emphasized more recently. What is that thing that just came out? Is it the Testament of Longinus?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. But one of the great things about Masquerade
is this that kind of Book of Nod style thing?
Yeah. I think
Yes.
In Masquerade you had the Book of Nod, you had the Caneth, and those things, they were very restrictive on some points in that they set up a whole bunch of events which led to monsters waking up and vampires appearing on TV but I mean, if you go back to that core idea, right, having that cool mythology and having that basis of unity in the mythology, right, is something that really helps communities form, right? Even if they dislike it, they get together to talk about it. So I think you have to have that in the content. I think also you have to have the tools in the game to support people talking. I think you need a fairly robust social networking application that is that's native to the game, so that it captures the community, gets them all in one place, instead of having them scattered throughout secondary social communities, like Facebook or some kind of third-party forum where right, because you have that whole situation with that whole situation with Eve and Something Awful, right, and the Something Awful forums, right, where a whole bunch of Eve players come from there, and there's sort of this big power block, right?
Okay.
And I think it's important, especially now, to capture players in a social network, and also to get them contributing on user-generated content and enriching the world themselves, right? And having multiple ways to share and talk about that, and not just within the game, right? Because you won't be able to log on to the World of Darkness MMO and play all the time unless you need some help getting your life in. And so you want to provide these communities that have multiple types and levels of participation, right? So if you want to just talk about it, you can. So if you want to share your fanfic, you can. Capturing fan fiction, capturing fan art, doing all of those things, right? Having some kind of integrated support for what in other games would be called guilds. I don't know what they would call them in the World of Darkness MMO, right? I think making it that 360-degree experience would be a great thing.
And the last question from Jem Mariano. What's your favorite RPG material that was eventually cut in the final editing process? Stuff that you wrote and then hit the cutting room floor.
Stuff that I wrote and then hit the cutting room floor. There have been lots of little bits here and there, but I can't think of anything huge. Like I said, a whole bunch of stuff got cut from Judgment, but actually, I'll use that. I was able to reorganize and reuse most of it, but one thing I couldn't use was this bit where the characters go to the spy's demise, and they meet the computer.
Yes.
Right.
That you released that online sometime back, didn't you?
I did release that online somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
Or I talked about it or something. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure I got a copy of that somewhere.
One of the things I wanted to sort of do in Judgment is I wanted to, because one of the things that's happening is you have control, right? You have this body running the technocracy, which is basically the social conditioning feedback loop, right? Where it's not that control is going and controlling the agent's mind. It's that agent's fears are being relayed to this concept of control, which in turn is being reflected back on them in the form of psychological conditioning, right?
Yeah.
However, that wasn't true for a couple of factions. It wasn't true for the Void Engineers who eventually just leave, right? They spin up the cop and they get the fuck out of that universe. And it wasn't true for Iteration X either, because all those bits where the computer was making people loyal to the machine and doing all that crap was actually something that was serving to prevent them from turning into crazy reality deviant hunting conformists. Right? I mean, they have their own sort of weird post-human, frightening post-human values, right? But in a way, they were kind of free from that.
Yeah, cool.
And there was a whole bunch of things where I wanted to go into the fact that that its role as that the computer's role as being this emergent intelligence was not necessarily contradictory with the exalted version of the backstory and so on and so forth. So
right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Vince, I'm going to let you dip into the Beckett bucket.
The Beckett bucket, yes. Well, in the interest of time, because we are pushing on 2 hours here, I'm going to grab the most relevant questions here. Okay, Malcolm, you're sitting down to write a book that White Wolf has given you. He gives an example of UFO, The Abducting. And how do you get in the mood to write? Do you listen to music? Do you go watch your favorite movie over and over again? Do you cut your toenails? What do you do?
I do cut my toenails because my toenails are really thick and kind of gross. And also, I don't like I do. One of my hobbies is jiu-jitsu and submission grappling, and if you cut somebody with your feet, then they don't like to roll with you anymore, and that sucks. Which actually is relevant because one of the things I usually do is I make sure that that I ramp up my physical fitness because I don't like to feel restless while I work. I do that. I might do some writing. I often like to write short fiction pieces, and usually, just 500 words or so, to get an idea of what the sort of narrative lines that are going to come out of the work are. I might even do a couple of sketches. I'm not a terrific artist by any means, right? But it's kind of cross-connecting those centers of inspiration. I don't know, maybe it's a left brain, right brain thing. Somebody who's more scientifically minded than you can figure it out. And then I think one of the most important parts of the process is waiting for my kids to go to sleep, because it's a small house and
Right.
they're noisy.
That would play an important factor, yeah.
I can empathize with that.
All right. Thanks for that. All right, and I'm dipping into the bucket Beckett. The Beckett bucket.
Beckett bucket.
Whoa. He wants to know, the paychecks you get from White Wolf, does it have cool designs on it, or is it just a plain wonderful paycheck from White Wolf?
It's a normal check.
Okay. Mark, you want to grab one of Warlock's questions?
Yeah, well, Warlock wants to know what's your favorite part about either Mage of the Awakening and Mage of the Ascension? Which of those? What are the two things about those game lines that really stand out for you as being enjoyable?
I think for Ascension, I went into it in a lot of detail before, and I think it's the idea of the relationship between morality and how we structure ideas is the thing that I think is big in Mage the Ascension. In Awakening, I think a lot of it is how we can conceive of ourselves and our accomplishments. How we conceive of success, because in Awakening you have this kind of super conservative bent where the world is terrible, Atlantis was better, right? Except that everybody's ideas about what Atlantis was or whether it was called Atlantis are different, right? So you have this construction of a narrative that explains who you are and where you've come from and where you're going, and the relationship we have with those narratives, I think, is pretty important. Also, for Awakening, I do like the ways in which the magic system has been tightened up quite a bit. Although I do think it's tad complicated. I usually cut out a whole bunch of rules when I run it.
Cool. Okay, we've got a couple of questions also from the wonderfully named Pronomancer. He wondered if you'd had any ideas for Dark Ages Fae that you were unable to implement due to its short run that you were then able to pick up and use again in Changeling the Lost.
No, unfortunately, not really.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
There you go, short and sweet. He also asks, and he says there's a very vocal opposition to Mage of the Awakening's overarching origin of Atlantis. Yes, it's the Atlantis Flame War rearing its head again. He says, particularly from Mage of the Ascension players. He says, having worked on both Old and New Mage, how do you feel about this controversy? Other than the obvious, wish it would go away.
This reminds me. I remember. I remember this guy who was complaining about Mage on EN World, and he was talking about, well, he's an actual occultist, and he follows, and he's one of these little pissant Aleister Crowley guys, right? And and what I ended up doing is, one of the major works on Atlantis in the context of occult traditions is by Aleister Crowley. He wrote a big monograph about, his past life in Atlantis. Really, I think the whole deal with it is emblematic of some of the ways in which Awakening succeeded, where Ascension started to fail, and that's in terms of accessibility. I think accessibility and real play, because I'm sorry to say, one of the terrible things about Ascension fandom toward the end there was that these were a bunch of people who weren't playing the fucking game, in a lot of cases. I mean, there'd be, we talk about, which, 3-letter acronym for the behavior of paradox.
Oh God, don't remind me.
And all this stuff about ultimate metaphysics, very little about playing the game. I mean, one thing about Ascension that, hardly anybody ever mentioned is that the base mechanic for the magic system doesn't make any sense, right? This is because of the number of successes you're likely to get on a low rank versus a high rank effect. For example, if I use my psychokinetic Akashic Dragon Punch, it will usually do more damage than me using Forces 5 to make a black hole.
Yeah.
Right? It all comes to the same table, right? So that didn't make sense, right? And if people were playing the game, you would expect them to comment on it. But a lot of times they weren't, so they didn't. It's the same thing for the orders, for all of this stuff. It's, however, to be fair, I think it does speak to Awakening's, Awakening does have weaknesses, and one of that is that it is very, very tightly focused on, this is a game that you will pick up and play. And this is a game full of ideas that can later be extended and elaborated on, and full of open-ended inspirations. And that perhaps is less evocative than plopping you into the middle of a grand conflict with strongly defined factions and spaceships and all of this stuff, right? Instead, in Awakening, right, you are given, you're given a structure to work with, you're given a basic mythology, you're given a motive to pursue, elaborate, spin and question that mythology, right? Built into the rules, because that's how you gain arcane experience. However, that a lot of the time, that's something that wasn't communicated with the same sense of fun and urgency, even if it has led to maybe a more robust play-oriented community, and kind of more decent games out there. So I think it's one of those things where it would be great to have another kick at the can at the Awakening core book.
Mm-hmm.
To really throw that zest in, right? I mean, it's one of those things, when we got into this, right, it was with the idea that, it's not going to be like, the old World of Darkness, where, here's your first edition, and then here's the hardcover that is the non-half-baked version of the game, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that we wanted something that was a functional game right out of the gate, right? And it succeeded, but there is a lesson there in that you can always do better, right? You can always do another chance or a chance to
Cool.
build it.
Well, he also wanted to know, what do you think Mage the Awakening does better than Mage the Ascension? You've kind of answered that pretty well just now. So he had a couple of questions on Geist. To step away from Mage for a moment, he says the power of traditional ghost stories comes from the idea of an unseen antagonist. Yet in Geist, Sin Eater can see the ghosts. So what kind of ghost stories could you expect players and storytellers to create, given that Sin Eaters pretty much spoil every traditional ghost story? And is Geist beyond the traditional ghost story?
That's not the power of traditional ghost stories. Shut up. Come on. No, the power of traditional ghost stories is that ghosts are dead and you're afraid of dying. You're afraid of dying, and the presence of a ghost paradoxically brings home the reality of death, because a ghost is different from you, and it gives you evidence that passing into death is passing into a form of difference, right? Where you are no longer you, right? And it's different from the being you have now. So it makes death real, even if you have a ghost wandering around with a semblance of being, right? That to me is the power of ghost stories. I mean,
Okay.
this is one thing where I think the values of RPGs are sometimes different from the values of fiction, in that in RPGs, dying is really not that big a deal, right? I mean, you make a new character, right? But in real life, dying is a pretty big fucking deal.
Yeah.
It's the thing all of us want to avoid for as long as possible, unless we're very depressed. So I reject this premise. However, I will say that certainly Geist, you can use Geist to tell the kinds of stories where where you resolve something for the ghost, right? And resolving something for the ghost is one of those classic ones, and you see it in all kinds of things. And I've always thought that resolving something for the ghost is really something like resolving, coming to peace with the reality of death yourself, right? Because you're acknowledging the ghost, you're acknowledging that when you die, there are things that you will want to have done in your life that you won't be able to do. Your life, everyone's life, will ultimately end in at least some kind of defeat, right? Because we will not. Some of us who have wanted to see the Great Wall of China up close, we won't have done it. Some of us who have always have wanted to tell our sons, our daughters, our lovers, our parents these things, will have failed to have done it, right?
Unfinished business.
Yeah, we'll have that. We will have that unfinished business, right? And by settling that unfinished business, or by opposing that unfinished business in the case of a destructive ghost, you acknowledge that you, the person, the player, are going to have that unfinished business.
Cool. Well, that kind of addresses his next question. He was saying Geist has been out for nearly a month at the time of his writing. So for those who are still on the fence, sell them on what you think is cool about it. So, I guess
so. I think it's also the life-affirming point of view of the protagonist, right? And the fact that we did try to move a little, a bit away from, the Victorian parlor spiritualist thing to something a little more colorful.
Right. Which parts of Geist did you work on, and what was your inspiration for those parts? Movies, books, paintings, comics, history, religion.
I worked on the crew creation section, which the mechanics are a little shaky, unfortunately, because the version that went in was sort of for the mid-developed version of the game. I will, incidentally, try to do kind of an unofficial erratum for those on my blog. At some
right, wow.
So just so you know, I've got a lot of I'm juggling a lot of things, but that is on my mind there, folks.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And I worked on antagonists, and I guess the whole idea that you can, the whole idea of building your own crazy death cult, that's pretty cool. And fortunately, there were, because faction, because I guess splat design is something that down at White Wolf Way, they know it pretty well. They've got they've got plenty of resources. I mean, Hunter, I nicked the tiers from Hunter. Nicked a lot of concepts from other games. As in terms of movies, books, paintings, comics, history, religions. Oh, I don't know, lots of stuff. It's one of those things where it really was about more about getting a desired game effect than an atmosphere. Although it does contribute to the atmosphere in as much that I wanted Geist to have a setting where everybody can be right about the occult, where you don't have the idea, you don't have knowledge being this privileged thing like you do in Mage, right? Because Sin Eaters, they just make shit up, and it still works, right? They're the people who can mash together the sensationalist '60s paperback about voodoo, and some chunk of Shirley MacLaine, and a fundamentalist preacher. Whatever he's saying at 2:00 in the morning on his spot TV time, and they could turn that into a functional cultic belief system that has real power.
Cool.
Okay, Mark, we're going to move on to Boggin Knight's questions.
Go for it.
Mr. Boggin Knight wants to know regarding your company, Mob United Media. Given the market shares are for smaller companies, how would you decide what projects need to be published?
Whether I like them. I mean, basically, Mob United Media is sort of what it's a locus for my freelance interests.
Right.
So it's I use it for a number of projects I do. Unfortunately, a lot of them are under NDA, like the MMO I was talking about earlier. But usually, if somebody comes to me with a really good idea, like Stu Wilson did, and
Steve Wilson, American hero.
Yeah.
And I can build on it, and I feel I have a useful role to play, then that's when I'll go for it. Or if I have an idea and I want to, turn it into a game real fast, I have this business, but the actual game publishing side of it is not really, it's something that, I make better than no money from it, as, strictly from the tabletop publishing side. But at the same time, it's mostly for me. It's mostly for my pleasure and to get things out there that I think would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Fun.
Okay, he also wants to just mention Dragons of the East. He just wants to say it's one of his most used source books in his Mage games, next to the Book of Madness and the New World Order, and he wants to thank you for all the years of fun, and he appreciates it.
Oh, thank you. I kind of cringe when I open it now, but I'm glad people still like it. My first book. Oh man, I was in university at the time. I had no sleep. It was pretty. It was pretty crazy. And I can actually segue from this into a question. I've got the questions up in front of me from Welding Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did I get started as a freelancer for White Wolf? Well, that was when I was in university. I actually contacted Jess Hainig on Usenet, right? And I wrote this big, long post about, making the Akashic Brotherhood cool. And he liked it so much, he asked me if I'd like to take a crack at some freelancing work that was sort of in that area, right? And I didn't hear from him again for about 2 years. But I contacted him occasionally and asked if he was still up for it, and he said yes, and he said yes, and eventually sent me a contract, and that's how I got
Cool.
started. Right? Over Usenet. It's for advice into freelancing. I would say the thing to do is not to do what I did, because really that was kind of a fluke and driven by the fact that Jess is a very nice and very smart guy, and he also happened to know about some of the stuff I was talking about in that original post. So he kind of recognized what was going on there. I would say for most people, the thing to do would probably be to participate intelligently in communities, come out with kick-ass fan material, and follow their submission guidelines. Right? Go to their site,
Yes.
submit stuff, get it into Slush, because they'll know you've tried that way. Right? And also, in terms of try to improve yourself, try to improve your craft, and for RPGs, for gaming, play games. Play games, run them, play a variety. And think in terms of a creator and not just a consumer, not just a what is this game going to do for me, but how can I fool with this to make it better. And I think most role players already have the instinct to do that, but often there's a tendency to slide back and think of oneself as just a client of the product. And I think it's important to reiterate.
Yes. Cool. Okay, well, our last set of questions come from a guy calling himself Darker Days Mark, who's clearly a mage fan with too much time on his hands.
Oh, yeah.
He says, in addition to your work on Dragons of the East, you are also the sole author on the revised tradition books for the Akashic Brotherhood and the Euthanatos. Now, these are often held as some of the strongest tradition books for Mage Revised. The treatment of respective cultures and beliefs and martial arts systems feels particularly authentic, for example. What do you feel that you were able to bring to those tradition books that has made them such a success?
Well, I guess for Akashic, it helps that, I'm a bit of a martial arts nerd. I worked on the fighting styles in Armory 2 for that reason as well. And it also helps that I grew up in a half Buddhist family, so a lot of those ideas and concepts were pretty familiar to me, and I wanted to see them. Well, you can't. Oh, here's the thing with you can't really do them authentically because there are real cultures out there, right, with real belief systems. You have to respect those, and you have to have a respectful distance away from the reality of that, and not try to represent it directly. But what you can do is you can take those inspirations and you can spin them in a fictive direction in a way that you feel is respectful. So for the Akashic Brotherhood, right, a lot of I kind of took as my root Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism because those are the forms of Buddhism that have a lot of syncretic features. Right, where they take things from other religions and they try to find a structure within esoteric Buddhism, or you have a lot of sort of Taoism and Buddhism mashups in traditional Chinese religion. But instead of saying the Akashics are these guys. Right. I said, well, what if there was a 4,000-year-old secret society weaving through these, right? But acting with the characteristics of these secret societies, right? How would they structure themselves? What kind of stuff would they do, right? What kind of belief systems would evolve from that, right? So taking that fictional line that threads through those cultures was sort of my way of dealing with that. And it was the same kind of thing with the Euthanatos. you have you have a whole bunch of belief systems that people adhere to quite seriously, right? And really, Kali is not really supposed to be scary like that, right?
Yeah.
That was one thing where, unfortunately, the pop culture elements of it are very engaging. Mm-hmm. They're also based on Orientalist, colonialist attitudes, but they are
mm-hmm.
really engaging. So I was stuck with this kind of paradox, and I tried to do my best. It's not something I would do the same way again, and
right.
it's but it seemed to have worked. And I know I was talking to a few Nepali Shaivists who were fans of Mage who were asking me about this, right? They were saying, well, these parts are authentic and these parts aren't. And I said, well, I can't represent your religion, right? I have to.
Right.
It's this weird thing where, to respect you, I have to make it fake.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Interesting. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's for a game, so,
Yeah.
Now, Manifesto transmissions from the Rogue Council, that brought the Ascension War back to center stage from revised edition of Mage the Ascension. How much input did you have in the direction of that project? Were you following a strongly codified set of guidelines from the developer, or were the specifics of the book's contents left in the hands of you and I think Angel McCoy was the other writer? In other words, how much was the return to the Ascension War developer-led as opposed to designer-led?
Well, that was something that was actually part of sort of the big Mage story arc from before the change in developers.
Right.
The idea was always that there would be a bit of a cleanup of a kind of cluttered, unfocused Mage continuity, right? I mean, for example, Mage was supposed to be about this four-sided conflict between the traditions of technocracy, the Nefandi, and the Marauders, but in reality, if you look at all of these of the first, second edition metaplot, it's all about internal stuff in the council, right? It's all about people hiding what Vormus is doing, and Karan Mustai being a dick to Porthos, and Porthos being crazy, and all this stuff, right? Which there was this big chunk of stuff that was far afield from what was supposed to be what the game was about, right? So the idea was to, clean things up a bit, although, the implementation due to a confluence of events was a little clumsy. And then, get things going again, right? Get that conflict going again. One of the things that Jess Hainig always kind of shakes his head about is when people kind of hold up Revised as the edition that finally makes the technocracy into the good guys, because he, like me, think that technocracy are fucking fascists, right?
Yeah.
So bringing it back was always the plan, but sometimes plans get kind of derailed, right? Because from things like feedback from sales and so on and so forth. So this was Bill's way of starting things right now, right? So the structure of having the secret messages and everything, that was sort of set. The exact format, that was Angel McCoy. I was really responsible for having having the backup characters and doing that adventure, right? And in that case, those were things that I just took straight from my chronicle. Right? The Jupiter's Forge was the Cabal from my chronicle.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, it goes nicely on to the next question. Alien Avatar, the adventure, and of course Judgment, which you mentioned earlier on, are famous for having their origins in your home chronicle. And as you pointed out earlier in the podcast, Judgment in particular is notable because of the way it ties so many plot threads together from the entire run of Mage the Ascension. Now, you talked about going through the various books of the line all the way back to Fragile Path and stuff. Did your home version of these adventures feature such strong tie-ins to the previous Mage material, or was that something that you specifically added for the published version?
Well, there were some, but not as many, definitely. But there were still some links. For example, but they were modified by the fact that my game was different. For example, in my game, the Avatar Storm came about because of a big a whole big thing where the PCs in my game were trying to keep the Shimasei antediluvian from rising, right, in New York, right, back in 2000, and I think that was the technocracy leg of my game. Sorry, it gets a little muddled because I ran this chronicle with 3 cabals in the same sort of meta setting for about 6 or 7 years. Right, so there were some details because the history was different. Also, the destruction of Dwasatep went down differently because it ended up being a whole Goremass related thing to try and rip off Dwasatep's node.
Right.
To go into it any further would be me telling you about details about my chronicle, which probably are not that interesting, but to anyone else. But that stuff was there. But my chronicle did not strictly follow the main Mage continuity. So naturally, I made adjustments. And also, there were some things to tie stuff up that weren't absolutely necessary in my chronicle. I had some of them written down as one-line notes, like what happened to the computer, right?
Right.
Like that's the kind of thing where, I had that set up in case the characters, popped over the spy's demise, but they never did, right? For Alien Avatar, I just want to mention something because there is a big change in Alien Avatar between the way I ran it and the way it was published, and it's kind of funny because when I ran Alien Avatar, it was a complete clusterfuck, right? It was fun. It was one of my group still talk about this session, right? Because they had a little thing where, all right, my buddy Steve was playing a Thig Technomancer, right? And he didn't have a lot of... His spheres weren't that high up. He wanted some guns that shot really well for this mission, right? So he used some spirit magic to awaken the guns, right? He didn't bind them or anything. So the guns really liked to shoot. Right? They really loved shooting, right? And if he held them, they would kind of track toward whoever was walking by, right? But they gave him 3 more dice on his firearms, so like kick-ass, right?
Huh? Cool.
Well, so they're going through Alien Avatar, and their plan was they broke into the database to get some of the names of the guards on the base, right? Some of the special forces operators, right? And they used some life magic to cut their own faces up into the faces of these guards, right? And after avoiding some snowmobile patrols, they got in. Unfortunately, Steve goes face to face with the guy that he's doubling.
Oh God!
So they have this chase into one of the administrative buildings. Steve managed to use a bit of forces chicanery to grapple the dude and then hold his pistol up to the guy's head, right? While the other operators are coming in with their guns, right? And he's going, "All right, everybody, just calm down here, and we'll just talk this over." And this is the point at which storytelling, just went bang, right? And Steve had been miming holding his gun. The awakened likes to shoot.
Yes.
Up to his head. Right? And at that point, everything went to shit. They ended up retreating at one point. The Euthanatos guy they had botched a bunch of vulgar healing spells. He ended up turning himself into a bomb by intentionally overloading himself with paradox and detonating for 31 dots backlash. And I thought,
oh my God!
Right? And they ended up, and so in the original thing, there were, I had a garrison of about 200 soldiers and a bunch of guys in power suits and so on and so forth. And when I submitted to Bill, he kind of goes, "Are you sure? This seems a little tough, right?" No, it's totally awesome, you know. I had this, and this happen. All this great stuff happened when I ran the adventure. Well, I guess Bill didn't think the whole, having one of the PCs turn into a paradox bomb. And all that. And, having them have to retreat and come back and so on was good, because he made me cut it back to far fewer people so that the story would be easier for the average group to live with.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you're working on a reimagining of Mage the Ascension at the moment through your blog called Mage the Dirty Version. Is this purely an intellectual exercise? Is it a fun outing in game design, or is it something that you see yourself or others actually playing?
That's a hell of a good question. I think the main thing is that this allows me to play with some stuff in game design without really worrying about, am I going to publish this myself as a commercial thing? It's something I can get an audience for. I can play with some game design ideas and kind of take in a relaxed fashion. I do think I'm going to run it. At some point. Right now, my dance card is probably full until early 2010 for gaming, just
right.
Because I've got a Star Wars Saga game coming up, and then I've got my adventure mod game, and then I'll probably get to it. But mostly, this is I guess this is sort of highly refined game design fanfic. It's something I hope other people will be interested in having fun with. And I think Sorry?
No, I was carrying on.
I think at some point I'm going to find some spots in the project, because it really is a big thing for something so casual, and I'm going to try and open it up for other participants. Maybe I'll throw a wiki on the site and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. So which part of it do you think you're most looking forward to yourself?
I don't know. I mean, I'm doing it in such a piecemeal fashion, right? Like right now I'm working on the Eumenides tradition, right? Which is one of the new traditions, right? It's basically the one that I have instead of the Cult of Ecstasy or the Euthanatos, because because the problem with the Euthes, right, is that they don't really have a decent paradigm for the sake of a magical practice. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had one that I put in the tradition book, right? But saying that there's a wheel of karma and you shake a bone and that's magic is not really a paradigm. Right. The cult have a great paradigm, but often you don't have a good set of motives for them, right? Like you can only get so far on free love. Just kind of sad. I love free love.
It's free.
It's free. So this is my mashup of them, adding a couple of other things to try and turn them into kind of a cohesive tradition. Also, this is kind of again, going back to the Invisibles, this is sort of the King Mob tradition, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of great sets, and then you shoot secret agents, and it's just bad.
Yeah. I read the opening fiction for them on your blog, so it was an interesting read. That's for sure.
Yeah, that was a lot cornier than I thought it was going to be when it started.
Cool. Well, I just want to wrap with then a couple of questions about Mage the Awakening. Do your home games still inform the material that you write for that? I mean, I had the impression from your website that much of the material you produced originates still in your home chronicles. If that's the case, what sort of advantages and disadvantages do you find that approach brings? I mean, like you said just now with Alien Avatar, the stuff that you thought worked really well, and Bill Bridges was like, nah, leave that
out. Yeah, well, I think the advantage is that is that I can see what enthuses my players, and my players also provide feedback, and they add their own creativity, and so I have this big, great brew of ideas that I can come to the table with, or come to the computer with to do work. The disadvantage is that you do have to look more broadly than your own group, right? That's the whole thing with Alien Avatar, right? Like, my group, people, they love blowing themselves up. In my in the game I ran just recently, if you read my blog, like all the PCs committed suicide, and they loved it.
Yes, that was very interesting.
But not everybody has those tastes, and so you have to look outside of that. And it's hard to find really good critique on the internet, because a lot of the time it's one guy who hasn't played the game and may never play the game sounding off. So what I read a lot of is narratives about this thing happened to me in my game, right? When somebody talks about a thing that happened to them in their game, I know where they're coming from immediately, right? Yeah. I know it's not a theoretical construct, it's just a bump they ran into, right? Mm-hmm. Or something they got into when they were making a character, something like that. I pay attention to that. But yeah, it has to be mediated by what a broad audience can find useful. But it's mostly that I can get this great source of ideas, and I get a basic idea of what works for my group.
Right. Now, speaking about things that you read on the internet, I've noticed in a few places that you'll see a discussion that talks about how Mage the Awakening took a while to find its tone and its focus over several releases. Now, I run Mage the Ascension. I treat Mage the Awakening as kind of like somebody's house I can go into and steal stuff from and then take it back to my own game. But so I don't have that overall view of the line as a whole. I mean, do you think it's true that it took a while to find its stride? I know Mage the Ascension went through several changes of tone and approach, for example. I mean, is it just due to the scope of the game line? Or
I did also read, just to add in here, I did read that Mage the Awakening did get put through and then it pulled back to add some more fluff and more flavor to it. Is that also true?
What, for the core?
Yeah, the core book.
Well, like I said, we designed 3 different mages. Right? Pretty much start to finish. And there were a lot of different things. I mean, but I don't think that was true with the fluff necessarily. As far as I know, there was nothing was really pulled back, except that it went through a long development cycle. And part of that was just the magic had to do with how big the magic system was, and the fact that we really wanted to try and get in spells this time instead of loose rotes. Now, in terms of finding its feet, finding its focus, I mean, I think with any new game you're going to get that. I think with Awakening, a lot of it comes from... I suppose it comes from seeing what engages people and running with it, right? Like, for example, the game originally wasn't so order centric, right? If you look at the early books, there's sort of there's equal measure of what paths and orders are up to, right? But eventually, we found that a lot of people were sort of reflexively situating their game around the orders, right? Because the orders gave you sort of that zesty content, and they gave you that ready-made PC role, right? So the orders got a bigger treatment. So, I mean, a lot of it is just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing
what sticks.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I don't think it was any more so than any other game line.
Right. Now, finally, for me, I just noticed this the other day. Actually, you wrote the Off the Map chapter of Boston Unveiled, right?
I did.
So that makes you responsible for the Prince of 100,000 Leaves. Do you recall where the inspiration or ideas for that came from? Because it's just a completely outrageous idea.
It came from the fact that when we were working on the whole thing with the Abyss, right? I wrote this thing to Bill Bridges saying that, I don't think we should have any more Lovecraftian stuff. I mean, I don't, people shouldn't be hitting a random row of keys anymore, and saying, oh, you worship this dude and he has tentacles. I mean, I'm fucking sick of it. There's already a game that does that stuff wonderfully called Cthulhu. Let's give this shit a rest for Christ's sake. And although I didn't use those words with Bill, and Bill, because Bill Bridges has this great sort of mythopoeic education, he was able to point out to me, well, it's not just Lovecraft, right? He talked about Swedenborgian mysticism and all these other things, right? And he said, it's popular, and there are these other precedents. So I accepted that, but of course, I kept a grudge. No, not a grudge. I kept a secret ambition to try and have the Abyss find its own voice, right?
Right.
And so the Prince is sort of my expression of that, right?
Okay.
Of being, the Abyss being kind of the realm of anti-narrative, right? Of things that are broken, but their brokenness comes to consume our reality, which is a bit different from your classic Lovecraftian thing, where the gods, Lovecraft's gods, they're not really outside of our reality, but they're what's true about our reality, right? What's terrifying is what's true, right? And the Abyss is sort of the lie to the lie. The world is the lie. The Abyss is the mockery that, reveals the deception inherent in the reality around you. And so I wanted to just make that a big deal. So it was sort of my attempt to try and find the game its own voice for, wacky Outer Darkness things.
Cool. Well, I used it as the central piece of a Mage the Ascension arc that ran really nicely for half a dozen, 6-7 sessions. And we're finishing a different session last night, and I said, then I'm going to be interviewing Malcolm Shepard tomorrow night. So if you guys have any questions, and he's the guy who wrote that Red Word thing, The Prince of 100,000 Leaves, and one of the players looks at me and goes, yeah, get him to answer why he hates us so much. So
Nice.
Cool.
Oh, I love having those cannibals. Actually, the funny thing is that there's a whole section. Actually, this is something that's been left on the cutting room floor that I miss. The town, the cannibal town where the Red Word is located. I originally had a comedy bit in there. I felt it was appropriate, but the idea was that I'd have this kind of Faulty Towers sort of scenario. Where, basically one of the ways you get into the town is that it has a really good restaurant, right? And the reason it has a really good restaurant is that one of the cannibals left town and went to France and became this noted chef, right? Because he didn't want to live with his hit cannibal buddies anymore, right? But, his cannibal ways asserted themselves, he ate several cooks and he had to flee. So he opened up this hotel and, it got, a star rating, right? So even though the place has been wiped off the map, you still have mentions of this great hotel. And this guy wants to still run his, he wants to run his business. So he keeps trying to get his relative not to eat the tourists. Right?
Awesome.
So I wanted to have that whole bit in there, but, apparently you can't be funny with cannibals. You can't be funny
dear.
with Massachusetts cannibals.
Well, I'm sure Vince has got at least one more question for you, a staple of the show.
Oh, yeah. Let me pull it out of the Beckett bucket. No, I'm just kidding. It is, Malcolm, if you could be a household appliance, which one would you be and why?
If I could be a household appliance,
Yeah. I know it's a tough one.
What?
From the sublime to the ridiculous.
I would be a blender because we need a new blender. And because the blender is sort of the destroyer god in the pantheon of the kitchen, right? But like all destroyer gods, it's ultimately responsible for the creation of something nourishing and new. So I would be,
Boy.
I would be the Shiva of the kitchen.
Cool.
All right. Well, folks, that is going to wrap up things this week for the episode number 11 of the Darker Days podcast. If you'd like to email us, we can push a question over to Malcolm Shepard. Or Malcolm, you want to plug your site or how people can get in contact with you if they need to?
If you want to contact me, you can email mobunitedmedia@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also visit me. I have a huge site and blog at www.mobunited.com. Now, you'll be redirected to the blog, so the actual blog's on a different URL, but you'll get a 301 redirect and you'll get right there. And there's about 2.5 years worth of blogging. Some are very angry, so that may amuse you. There are also links to some of the games that I make and some of the stuff I've worked on. List my freelancing credits. There's Eternal Legends, the game I work on with Stu Wilson, and a way to go buy that. We just dropped the price on that.
Oh, excellent.
That's right.
Yeah. Right, and a bunch of insights about tabletop RPGs, some stuff on computer games and social media, and I always welcome your inputs, your input or comments.
Excellent.
Cool. Well, we want to say thanks for coming on the show. It's been really interesting to hear your answers and thoughts on Mage, various versions and other games, so thanks a lot for that.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. And you can find us at darkerdays.tk, or you can email us at darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. Look forward to our next Darkling number 2, which should highlight Beckett's New World of... was it Book of Nod? Sorry, Book of Nod.
Book of Nod for the New World of Darkness, yeah. And then after that, our next show will feature David Hill, so keep your ears peeled, folks.
David.
Awesome.
So we'll sign off, and everyone have a great night.
All right.